love is enough. God's love is enough. God's love is enough. God's love is enough.
All right. God's love is enough. God's love is more than enough. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening. Whatever time you might be listening to this recording, or you may be listening to the live broadcast. My name is Oliver Blue, and it gives me great pleasure to be here sitting in this chair in this moment, in this time. I'm just so excited. I'm just overjoyed. And I am going to be your temporary guide on the side, not your sage on this, not your sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. And I am here representing Truly Foundation. And Truly Foundation is a nonprofit organization that was co-created by my lovely wife and myself for the sole purpose of sharing what we call advanced spirituality. Advanced spirituality means exactly what it says. It means it is advanced. It means it is not the elementary, rudimentary, basic awareness, but it goes beyond the basics of spirituality. And so we do this, and we're motivated by our own experience. We're motivated by our own path, our own experience of advancement. And we say that because, just from our observation, we just see a lot of humanity that don't even get started, in their own search for their own awareness of their own self. And then we also observe that many of us get started on a spiritual journey, and we don't get past the elementary stuff. And then we just leave it all up to others to teach us, or we do this drive-by thing once or twice a week, just for the sake of we feel like it's the right thing to do, or we feel like, well, if we don't do this, then we're not in touch, or we're not in right standing. And but for many reasons, there's this abdication of our responsibility to grow and to advance in the knowing of ourselves, in the understanding of life itself. In many cases, we just stay at the foundational level. And so we provide these platforms, these opportunities where we share advanced spirituality, especially for those who are on their growing edge, those that have who have acquired a taste for going into the deeper things of the knowing of themselves, understanding life itself, understanding the one that's responsible for all that, who we call in many spaces, we call God. But anyway, so I'm here representing Truly Foundation, and I'm also here today, which is a regular exercise on my part, is to present another lesson out of the workbook lessons in A Course in Miracles, which is a 365-day course in mind training. And we started this 93 days ago, and we're on day 93. So I'm going to incorporate my regular recording for the groups that I'm leading through uh, this journey that we're on of training or renewing or transforming our minds, as Scripture would say, be not conformed to this world, or be not conditioned by the world way of thinking, but be ye transformed by the renewing of our minds. And that's our responsibility. It's a personal responsibility. Uh, though we have access to many resources and many helps, but in reality, it is each one of our responsibility for our spiritual well-being, for our complete well-being. It's really up to you. It really comes down to the decisions that we make. It comes down to whether we accept, the status quo, or whether we take the initiative to be proactive, whether we take the initiative to intentionally look into, investigate, inquire into what is real versus what is not real. And so today, this is kind of like a twofold operation going on, because I wanted to share something from a recent post. I wanted to talk briefly about a recent post I made on several platforms concerning the subject of innocence. Concerning this subject of innocence, I think innocence is probably the most needed subject that needs to be really unpacked and talked about over and over again. And you may ask, Oliver, why? Why is innocence so important? None of us are innocent. We're all guilty. Even you might say, well, even the Bible said that we're all guilty. We're all sinners. We all without a savior, we're all lost. We're all separate. And I know that's the common thinking and the common teaching, especially here in the West, in the western part of the globe. But I say that innocence is so important, it's so huge, it's so enormous, because, first of all, because my own struggle with it. Let me start there. Let me be honest. I struggled many years, as I made in my post, as I mentioned in my post, that I struggled many years. For many years, I was laden with this sense of guilt, which led to fear. This was my experience. And it was not a guilt from things that I was doing. I wasn't guilty for what I was doing, but it seemed to be an inherent guilt based on a self-judgment that I was making, or a self-perception that I was making. Or I had a self-concept, or a concept of myself that I had made. And yes, this was influenced by the conditioning that I had from the time that I was born. It was influenced by conditioning. When I say conditioning, I'm merely talking about the environment for which I grew up in, the nurturing that I had, the teachings that I received, the point of view of others. And then a lot of that came from, of course, I had two parents, I had 6 other siblings, and then I lived in the community. All of us kind of grow up in that basic platform where there's an immediate family, which include parents, siblings, immediate community, which includes schools and church and the neighborhood, the culture. And so that when I say conditioning, my conditioning came from what was shared, what was extended to me, and what I experienced in that environment. And so a lot of the point of views that I embraced about myself came from the point of views that others had about themselves and their experiences and their knowledge and their awareness. So at the end of the day, you become 10 years old, 15 years old, 20-year old, and you really don't know yourself. All you know is what you've been conditioned to be, the way you've been conditioned to think. And if you grew up in a family um, that advocated one religion over another, then I mean, the point of view of a having a consciousness towards God also came from the conditioning, but it wasn't really something that you have embraced from your own investigation, your own point of view, your own research, your own inquiry. So you basically become a product of your conditioning. You become a product of your environment, and you create what we call paradigms, which are basically habits, which include the way you think, the way you feel, the way you perceive, um, and all this is basically a part of the process again, which I call conditioning. So I found myself very early in my life. When I say early, I'm talking about prior to, say, age 28. Prior to that time, um, there was this sense of guilt and fear that I not only felt, but I believed that it was who I was. I thought I was guilt, and I thought I was fear. And I'm not talking about just the natural proclivity to fear, a ferocious dog, or to fear a car coming down the street and you're standing in the middle of the road. I mean, those are good fears because it keeps us, from testing um, what is really sensical. But the fear I'm talking about is this internal, intrinsic uh, sense of something is wrong with you. Something is the matter. Something's not quite right, and like I said, that it was not a guilt from the things that I was doing, but it seemed to be an inherent guilt based on self-judgment, and the self-judgment came primarily from my perception. My perception was founded basically on the conditioning that I had, for over 25 years. And some of it came from what we call the secular society, but a lot of it came from what you call my religious upbringing. And so there was a God of my understanding that came out of, my, and that at that point, Christian experience. And I think all of that contributed to the way I viewed myself, the way I viewed the world, and the way I viewed God, and the way I viewed other people in life in general. But it wasn't until I became a student of spirituality that I realized how innocent I was. It wasn't until I became a student of spirituality. And what I mean about that is, it wasn't until I took responsibility, personal responsibility, to address the guilt and the fear, that I began to find the source of the problem as well as find the answer to the problem. And in my discovery, I discovered that there was only one source and there was only one answer. And the answer was in the source. And so that's what I meant earlier when I said that a lot of us, we just start or don't start on having an engagement or an experience in spirituality uh, which is basically has to do with the inward looking uh, interest that we take in coming to want to know what is real, what is true, what is life all about, what am I all about, what about this one God that we've been taught about? What about the world? What about the things of the world? What about the history? What about my history? And where's my place in this? All of this. And so we all, at some point, decide to go on a spiritual journey, meaning we all decide to find out, hey, what's the real deal here? We want to answer those basic questions. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? And why am I? And so for me, that journey started at about age 25, about age 28. That's when it started. I really became serious about the knowing of myself. And it was then that I realized, when I say become a student, I mean that I took the responsibility for looking for the answers. And I looked at many places. Many places. Started with, of course, what I knew. I started with the Bible. And then that expanded out to other, spiritual literature, spiritual documents to help make heads tear about life. And I realized that the guilt that I was experiencing, the fear that I was experiencing, was coming from my conditioning and my belief system that I had believed about myself. In other words, it was not coming from the reality of who I was. It was coming from what I had made of myself based on the conditioning. I took all the different inputs from life and my experiences, and I formulated a self. And in this formulation of this self was a separate self. I accepted myself as an individuated, separate being from all other beings, as well as separate from even my creator, because from the conditioning that I had. The creator sits high and humanity sits low, and there's a big gap in between. So that's what I call separation. That's not creator and creation was not one entity, but it was two different entities. And so I formulated my concept of myself based on that. And most of the 7.8 billion people on the planet right now hold that same concept, because most of us are conditioned on the basis of the separation. What is real is what our true identity. It comes directly from our body, mind, self, our body, our physical self as an individual self, and not come from the point of view of the one that created us. So our purpose also became somewhat self-made and not what the creator intended. And so I, like most people, was conditioned to believe that separation and body identification was real. This created a sense of vulnerability and a state of isolation in me. Meaning vulnerable, meaning when you look at the human body in this ever fast flowing world, and you see and know the limitations of the body, and you know how frail this body is. It's subject to be hurt, to be mangled, to be destroyed, to be sick, to be weak, because this is all a part of our experience as a body. The body is a very frail entity. it has to be protected. It has to be protected from the elements. It has to be protected from the animals. It has to be protected, from that which is seen and unseen. Just like now, we're in the pandemic moment. We can't see the you can't see the elements that carry the virus because they're invisible, but they're there. But the body has to be protected from that, as well as the things that we can see. That's why we all have to create a habitation in which to protect the body, a house, a place to live in, a place of safety. So the body in and of itself is a very fragile, uh, entity, subject to pain, subject to um, lethargic sensibility. It's the thoughts that are self-defeating, the perceptions uh, that change on a dime based on the external conditions. So the whole concept of this body in this giant world being who we are and having to preserve or save the body in order to save our life is a frightening thing, because we know that the body is very fragile, very vulnerable, I guess you might say. And so we place all of these elements as a part of our identification. And so we see ourselves in this place of isolation, a place of separation, separated from others, from God, from the world, and having to navigate, not only physically but mentally and emotionally and psychologically, and wanting peace and love and joy and security all at the same time. And then we also realize that we're in a world of systems, that systems are built based on this same, idea of separation, the same idea, and the idea of inequality, because anything that is separate is not equal. So we got separation going, we got inequality going, and we're looking to find a place of peace. We're looking to find what is the truth about all of this. And so, when I brought this enormous thinking to the truth of my innocence, which I discovered in my spiritual journey, in my search, in my inquiry, in my wanting to know my true self, I discovered over time that I'm not only innocent, hang on one second. All right, something popping up on my screen here. But that I'm not only innocent, but all humanity is innocent. And this innocence is not based on this self that we made, and this self-concept of ourselves that we made based on our conditioning. But our innocence, or the innocence that we are, is based on it's based on the one that breathes all of us. It's based on the one that created all of us. That one supreme entity that most of us call God, or we call love, because God and love is synonymous. We know that Scripture said that God is love. And this is the way I like to put it. God is the supreme, and God is the only reality. I like to say it this way: there's a God and there's nothing else in reality. And the experience of that oneness of God is what I call love. So love is the experience of God, or the experience It becomes the experience of yourself. Because in this innocence, you discover that there is no separation, there is no isolation, but that who we really are at our essential nature, our core self. In other words, if we were stripped down to our essential self, including stripped away from the body, what would we be? Who would we be? And I have discovered through my own investigation and research that who we are at the very core, no one excluded, is that we are an extension of this supreme being that we call God. And not only are we an extension of this supreme being, but we share in the same being. So there's only the one being. We call it God. And who humanity is an extension of that one being we call God. In other words, having the same what? Having the same essence. We're not separate beings. We're not, even though it appears in this human experience that we are, but in reality, that's not who we are. Or that's not what we are. But in reality, we are this shared being. We share the same being that God is. Even though we might be individual expressions of that one being, but it doesn't make us separate. It's like when you look up at the sun and you see the sunbeams as they extend out from the sun, this being the sun, say the core of my hand, and then my fingers represent the sunbeams. I mean, we see it all the time. If you look up at the sun, sometimes you can't even look at the sun directly, but you can see the beams. And what we're illustrating here is that just like the sun and its beams, the beams that emanate from the sun, have the same quality. There's no difference. There's no separation. It's just an extension of the glory of the sun. The beams are, and each beam is it looks like a separate, unique expression, but it's not. It's all part. It's all the sun. It's all one and the same. Each beam represents the fullness of the sun. What's in the fullness of the sun is in the fullness of each beam. No different. It's all part of the one. For you folks that love to go to the ocean and watch the waves come in, here's another illustration or another symbol of what we're trying to explain here. Is that each time a tide or each time a wave comes into shore, it appears to be separate or an individual expression. No two waves are the same, like no two beams are the same, or like no two human beings are the same. And it appears to be the ocean waves appear to be different, but they're not. Or they appear to be what's separate from the ocean, but they're not. But what you will notice, just like with the sunbeams, that the sunbeams eventually they go back into the sun. And each wave of the ocean eventually returns into the depth of the ocean. Why? Because it's part of the ocean. It's not separate. It's one. So in like manner, what I discovered is that humanity in form, meaning these bodies, is not that appear as individuated cells or individual cells or separate cells. We appear. It seems that way. But in reality, we are just individual expressions of the one source. which is individual expressions of the one source in form. And that in and of itself, because we appear to be separate, can give us the idea of what of separation from each other and from what? From our Creator and from all the things of this world. Even nature, we're separate. So the idea of separation is reinforced in the environment that we find ourselves in, which we call this world, which we know that it is not our real home. It's not the real deal. The world in and of itself is just a temporary idea. It's not permanent. You see everything in the world, well, it has a beginning and an end. Everything in the world appear to be what? Decaying, even our bodies. Why? Because they are not of the nature of our Creator. The nature of the Supreme Creator is eternal, has no beginning, has no end. It's the giver of all life. The nature of the Creator is that it's what? That is unchangeable. It is unmutable. Again, it has no beginning, has no end. And so what we experience here in this three-dimensional world that we appear to be in is totally opposite to that which is the nature of our Creator. So that's why we can become so confused about our identity, because what we're basing our identity on what? The body identification, which is full of what? Limitations, where we know that in the Supreme Creator we call God, there is no limitation. God is infinite. There's no beginning, there's no end. And so mankind has what? Taken his environment, including what? Its body identification, and have what? Created a self-concept of himself that is totally opposite to his reality. Thus came the guilt and the judgment. And then we pin this big label on ourselves. Big label, all of us come, at some point get the big label pinned on our back, not our names. And it's the big S word, S-I-N, sin. And so these are all man-made concepts of ourselves. And so what these self-concepts leads to an awareness or consciousness of sin, which the Bible calls sin consciousness. What it means, it just means that what we focus on the reality of us being a separate self, when in reality that is not who we are. But that becomes what? The place of focus. That's where we place our focus. That's where we place our energy. That's where we place our attention, to the fact that something is wrong with us. And that we're all doomed to experience what we call death. And that in and of itself is very depressing. It's a depressing thought. It creates a lot of anxiety. And so when you get 7 billion people on one planet with a propensity or a consciousness towards a self concept of themselves as being vulnerable, as being something's wrong, it creates the guilt, it creates the judgment. And it's coming from a place that's not even real. It's coming from a concept that's not real. So humanity has somehow been able to convince himself that he's something that he's not. We have come to convince ourselves that we're something that we're not. And we keep passing that idea down to generation to generation to generation. So when Jesus came on the scene 2,000 some years ago and inquired about himself and learned the truth about himself, which was totally foreign to the people of his time. Even his concept with God was totally foreign to those of his day. But he was totally convinced that God was a loving father. The nature of God was what? That of a father, of a loving father. And we know in the natural, a loving father, a loving father, what the kids can do no wrong. Kids will never be abandoned. They will always be their kids. And they got their kids back. But the concept of God at the moment that Jesus showed up was that God was angry with humanity. And only what special few could talk to God, like Moses and all the prophets. So they waited for the prophets and the priests to come and tell them what God said. And so the prophet and the priest that went up to talk to God, remember, they had the self-concept of themselves as being guilty and in fear. So regardless of what message God told them, they would come back and communicate to the people. The message was not clear, but they were influenced by what they thought of themselves. And so they always came back with a message of judgment and condemnation. That if you didn't straighten yourself out, God's going to get you. And so this idea, of separation, this idea of a God who was angry with what he made, with all the stories that have been printed about, how God destroyed the earth, or how God was mad at man, how God made such and such sick, how God destroyed, Job's family, how God, wiped out this whole nation of people. So all of that came from man's concept of himself, and that concept of himself influenced the message that they kept that they believed for themselves and shared with others. And thus, this idea of separation has been passed down from generation to generation, even to 2022. It's still been taught that there's still fear-based theologies out here that still teach that we're sinners. We're not innocent. We're sinners saved by grace. And so we still have even though we've been introduced to a theology that includes a savior, that if you accept the savior, then you can escape you can escape the wrath of God. So the idea here is that God has wrath. I mean, he gets angry. But this is the same concept that the people of Jesus' day had of God, based on their own self-concept. And so we find ourselves today. You find yourself in your own lifetime. Some of you right now are, in a self-inquiry mode. Some of you right now are confused about who you are, why you are, where you are. What is life all about? We all have to face those questions. No one come here without facing those questions. And when we come here, we try to numb ourselves to avoid the question, but that numbness eventually wears off. And when we eventually get quiet, there is a silent voice that speaks to us. It says, "Hey, I want that. There's some things I want you to know." But because we've been so highly developed in our 5 sensual capacities to communicate, when this 6th sense emerges within us and want to have this conversation with us, we're not comfortable with that. So many of us, again, we try to cover that or douse that because we're not very comfortable with the whole idea. We want to stay with what we know, which is what body identification. That social security number, that name, that image that we've created for ourselves. This plan that we have to achieve, this plan that we have to, go to school, get a good education, get a good job, get good pay, get the house, get the girl, get the children, raise the children, graduate the children, get the grandchildren, and eventually retire. It's all a box that we put ourselves in. Some of us call it the American dream. Some of us call it the American hell. That is not possible. And then at the end, what? They put us in a box. And so, as the story was told, never to be known anymore. That is a very, very depressing story. We notice that when we get in the box, nothing else comes in the box with us. All that we have accumulated over all these years, it stays here. You can't take it with us. And so it is in that vein, it is from that point of view that we create a self-concept of ourselves. And that self-concept is not innocence. It's not a self-concept of innocence, the concept of guilt, a concept of separation. So we don't have so in that moment, I know how it was for me prior to the knowing of myself. In those moments, there's this sense of vulnerability, man. And life is running by so fast. Things are happening really fast, and there's no time out. Monday goes to Tuesday, goes to Wednesday, goes to Thursday, goes to Friday, goes to Saturday, Sunday, and back to Monday. Life will not stop. It keeps rolling right along. And we're trying to hold it all together. We're trying to build this life. But included in that life is guilt and fear. And a consciousness towards something is wrong with me, called sin consciousness. And I'm just reading from the post I made earlier. Just wanted to get a little bit more in depth in it. I think it's going to help someone. When I was brought but then, like I said, in my investigation, I found out that all this was erroneous. It was all fictitious. It was not my true identity. It was not my inheritance. It was not even my idea. But what I discovered was that who I was a God idea. And that all humanity is a God idea. And when I say a God idea, I'm not talking about the body self. I'm not talking about our body self. Our body life, our physical life. I'm talking about who we are at the core was a God idea that was created before time, or before the world was, before there was any physicality. And so what I discovered is that who I really am, who humanity really is, we are timeless beings. Or we share with one timeless being called God. And that we are formless beings. That who we are at our essential nature, we're formless. Meaning we're bodiless. That's who we are. And that's who we have always been. And that's who we will always be. There's a song that I love and understand now that we used to sing when I was coming up through my Presbyterian experience. And it went like this. As it was, it went like this. It said, as it was in the beginning, it is now and forever what shall be. So how was it in the beginning? Which we understand also that what there is no beginning. We've always been. As long as God has been, we have been. Because remember, we're God idea. So how was it in the beginning? It was timeless. We were beyond time and space, which represents limitation. How was it in the beginning? We were without form, which God is formless. God is formless. The idea of the source of all life is formless. What has what? The infinite intelligence, what? To create form or to make form an experience. Because God only created one thing. God only created the one thing. And what God created was you and me as timeless, formless beings. That's why I love the scripture over in Jeremiah that says, what? Before I formed Jeremiah in his mother's womb, I knew him. So before form, Jeremiah existed. See? He said, before I formed Jeremiah in his mother's womb, or before Jeremiah was formed in his mother's womb, I knew Jeremiah. So Jeremiah was what? Timeless and formless. So before you and I was formed in our parents' womb, before that, we existed. So what do we exist as? Whatever God existed at, that's what we existed as. Because what? We share the same being that God is. We're no different. So we were what? Timeless, formless beings. That's our reality. Even though we find ourselves having this what? Human experience in time, in space, and in form. And somehow we got bamboozled to believe that time and space and form is real. Because what? That's the experience that we're having, or that's where we have focused our attention. But when we come to recognize that there is something responsible for time and space and form, and we become aware of that, when we recognize that, that is the process of what the term enlightenment means. It's but a recognition. When we become aware of our true self, our true nature, as one with the Creator, we have just entered into a place of bright lights. Because what? Now we see different. We have a different perception. And so the concept that we held of ourselves prior to this awareness, we don't hold that concept of ourselves anymore. We have a different perspective. Now we're seeing from the perspective of the Creator. Now we're seeing as God sees. And so this whole engagement or process of coming to the knowledge of your true self and the knowledge of your Creator and of your brother is the most natural process there is. It's quite natural for us to wake up from the sleeping state of a body, mind identification to an identification of our true self as being a shared part of the one self. Paul put it this way. He said that what God was in Christ, reconciling what the entire world back into himself. In other words, he was waking humanity up. He's waking humanity up to come to know who we really are as one with our Creator. Jesus put it this way when he walked the planet. They thought he was crazy. He said, "Well, I and my Father are one." And then he put it another way. He said, "Well, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father." And they thought he was talking about his body because they was living in what body identification. But no, Jesus was talking about a reality that has never changed. Who we are has never changed. Who God created you to be, that's never changed. Who you were before you was formed in your mother's womb, that's never changed. What changed is your concept of ourself, of yourself, your concept of your reality. Is what changed based on your condition. Until what? Until you responded to the unction that was coming from within you. To say, hey, we need to have a conversation. There's some things you need to know. And so we all are born with this internal teacher that's been with us all our days. It came into the body experience with us. It's almost like the memory of who we are. The Course said it's the memory of God that came into this time, space, body experience that we find ourselves in. For the main purpose, for the sole purpose, of pointing us back to our reality so that we don't have an experience of fear and guilt and sin consciousness. And we've made strides toward, an acceptance of that. There's many, religions, old religions, young religions, that make strides towards that. But still, if you look at their model, it still has a sense of separation in their theology. And a lot of the theology is fear-based theology. If you don't do this will happen to you. If you don't do this, God's gonna, do this, or ain't gonna do this. If you don't do this, then you're cursed. If you don't do this. So it's still within those attempts to embrace our fullness, there's still elements of separation. There's still elements of guilt and sin and fear. So don't you get so high and mighty, God will cut you down. That's what they tell you. That's what the religions will tell you. It's like they told Jesus. They told Jesus he's a lunatic. They asked Jesus, said, who gave you the power to forgive sin? And Jesus said, if you knew who you were. He didn't say, if you knew who I was. He said, if you knew who you were. You would be happy to see the day that I'm coming with the message that I'm bringing to you. And that's the way I feel here in 2022. Not that my message is any, something special. No, I just know from my own experience and the knowing of myself that this message of innocence is so important for all of us. If you want to know why the world is so in the way that it is, with so much division, so much stress, so much anxiety, so much fear, so much division, so much inequality, so much warring and fighting and killing, so much destruction. If you want to know why the nature is such in an uproar with storms and volcanoes and earthquakes and and extreme heats, and extreme colds. If you want to know why, all of this is happening. That mankind can look in the eye of another human and not see the mark of God in each other and not know that they're brothers and sisters. But what they see is through the eyes of fear and guilt is an enemy to be destroyed. And so to take another's life doesn't mean anything. And so we have this younger generation that we look at in disdain and say, oh my God, they have no sense of value for life. You kill each other, steal each other over a blunt, over a, over a over anything. And we see this world that's in turmoil. But you might be saying, well, look, that's not my life. I live in peace. I'm over here in my little neighborhood and my little family, and we don't get involved with none of that. We live in peace. Well, all you have to do is step outside your door. In many cases, there's no peace in the house that we're living in. We just tolerate one another. So all I'm saying is the answer to all of that is the knowing of ourselves. If we knew who we really were, it would resolve all the problems. Like I said, there's only one problem that we have. And that problem is what? That problem is our belief in separation. Our belief in this self that we have made. And that we are separate beings to that which created us. And that what? We're not aware that which created us in the manner in which it created us, it hasn't changed. So that now we have a belief system, and we have a mind that what supports that belief system, because the mind has been trained to believe and to think in that manner. And that's why Romans says what? It is imperative that we not be conformed to that way of thinking, that way of believing, that which man created, that which man made. Only God creates. Only God can create, meaning extend what is. And what he extends is likened to himself. Humanity, we make things out of something else. And it's not the same as what is made. And so there in and of itself is division and separation. But in our reality, that I, that we are, that I am, God is, therefore what he extended, it became the I am. We are the I am. When we begin to turn our focus and give our full allegiance to that reality of who we are, not as a body, myself, but as a shared being with God, everything changes in our life. Our self-concept of ourselves doesn't even exist anymore. What only exists is what God created. And he created us like unto himself. God is love, therefore we are love. God is light, therefore what? We are the light of the world. We are light. That's what Jesus said. We're the light of the world. Because he's talking about what God created, not what we made. We are joy. We are peace. We are abundant. We are creative. We are eternal. We are what? Unchangeable. We are unalterable. That's who we really are. And the day that I discovered that, everything changed. The world didn't have to change. Only thing had to change was my understanding, my way of perceiving, having God's point of view. And that point of view was innocent. I was innocent, always have been. I was pure and innocent. I was part of the what? Innocence of God, the pure presence of God, the oneness of God. That's why Jesus said over in the Beatitudes, he said, what? Only the pure in heart shall what? See what? God. Who's the pure in heart? The pure in heart is when you wake up to your reality. Everyone is the pure in heart, but everyone don't see through that point of view. When you wake up and see through that point of view, everything changes. And what I also discovered, which was a huge lift off my shoulder, is that I don't have to go out and save anybody. Once I woke up. Because this perspective that I have now as the innocent child of God is that everyone is innocent. But everyone don't know it. Therefore, their not knowing don't change anything. They're still innocent. And so I can treat them that way. See, if you don't know you're innocent, that means that you believe that you're guilty. That means that what you see everybody else is guilty. And so the attack is on. It's attack or be attacked. Killed or what? Be killed. And that's what you see going on in the world. That's why it is that way. And we'll never be able to negotiate our way out of the attack mode. It may subside for a minute, but it'll be right back. You notice it. It'll subside, but it'll come right back. Why? It's just time to plan for what? Further attack, further warring. That's been the history of the world. Let's look at it. In your own personal life, we have peace for what? 36 hours, 24 hours. And then we find ourselves what? On the attack again. Self-sabotage. Don't know why we're doing it, but we feel like what? In this body identification, I have to what? Protect myself. And the best way to protect myself, what? Is what? To hurt all my enemies. To keep my enemies at bay. And so this whole concept of an enemy, oh my God. It's hard to even hear a religious message come out without people talking about what? An enemy or the enemy. Well, where is that coming from? It's coming from this what? Idea of separation. That God is at war with someone. God is at war with humanity, or God is at war with another spiritual enemy. And so this whole concept of an enemy, you can't even sit down and listen to a message about people talking in well-meaning folks talking about what? The enemy. Where's that idea of an enemy coming from? Or a devil on every corner. It's coming from what? That self-concept of separation. Yeah, I'm saved, but God's up there, we're down here, or nowhere the two shall, shall cross. So that in and of itself still promotes the idea of separation. It promotes the idea of what? Inequality. It doesn't promote the idea of innocence. And so, but we're repeating the same thing that the people of Jesus, they repeated. We're just more sophisticated with it. We got more devices to communicate it. But let somebody stand up and say what? What Jesus said, and you get the same response here in 2022. I say I and my Father are one. That when you see me, you're seeing my Creator. And you can say that too. All humanity can say that. Because we have not changed what God created. We have not changed who we are. Who we are is innocence. And when you know that you're innocent, there's an inner sense. There's an inner sense within you. There's an inner peace within you. There's an inner knowing that is within you. It's not out there where we've chased for it out there, but there's an inner sense of belonging. There's this inner sense of equality. There's this inner sense of joy and happiness. There's this inner sense of abundance, this inner sense of eternity. There's this inner sense of awareness. That causes us what? To remain what? Free, regardless of what is happening in the world. It causes us to remain what? To remain certain, regardless of all the uncertainties that are happening in the world. There's this inner awareness, this inner place, this secret place, this place of rest. Like Hebrews says, there's a rest what? For the people of God. That's what all humanity. See, we think that when the thing about this separate religions, you think that when they're saying some of the true realities that are spoken out of these different traditions, we think that it's been spoken just to a special group. Like this group, and that's the same way it was when Jesus came. People thought they had a curve on God. The Jews, they thought that God was only for them. It wasn't for anyone else. Well, you got different religions today that think the same way, that God is just for them. Everybody else is wrong. So it's either our way or the what? Highway. And our way is man's way. And so it's not any of those ways. Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. So what are we talking about? He's not talking about him as a person. He was talking about what he represented. He was talking about the life that modeled the reality of there's only one. And he was part of the one, to the point where he said, I and my Father are one. That's what he meant. And he wasn't meaning that for himself. He was representing all of us. So that to teach us what we have to get to the point where we see the innocence that we are. And you have to break away from everything you know to have this experience. To embrace full innocence, you have to walk away from everything you've been taught. And give your full attention, your full credence to the reality of your oneness with God. I don't care who you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. This is not about what you're doing. We can make the decisions to do whatever we want to do. We have that freedom. Because that's the Spirit of God. Where the Spirit of God is, there's liberty, there's freedom. There's no judgment, there's no condemnation, there's no restrictions. But you will have to, and I will have to leave everything that we've known in order to embrace the reality of who we are. Jesus had to do it. He stood by himself. God promised it. He guaranteed it. That's what he created, and that it cannot be changed. And for those of you that know the Bible, in Hebrews it says, by two immutable things, he guaranteed it. He guaranteed our what? Guaranteed who we were. And what he could swear by no greater, what he swore by himself. Saying that what we are the blessed. Blessings I will bless thee. No curse. But then we'll say, well, if you don't do this, you're cursed. So who's right, man or God, right? Man will tell you, you don't do certain things with your money, you're cursed. You don't do certain things with your body, you didn't sin. Or if you do certain things with your body, it's sin. That's what man will tell you. But you and I are free to do whatever we want to do while we're here on the planet. But we have a responsibility to do it through our reality as the light of the world. That's our function. So whatever you're doing, love what you're doing. Do it with all the gusto. But do it from a perspective of your innocence. Do it from the perspective that you are the light of the world. You bring luminosity. You bring reality into everything that you're doing. You're bringing it from the very being that we share with our Father. So therefore, there's no judgment. So where you're being judged, that just lets you know that where the judgment is coming from, it's coming from a place of separation. Someone that's judging themselves. That's what Jesus said. Judge not that you be not judged. But with the same, what judgment you meet will be meted back to you. So if a person is coming from a place of guilt and fear, that his judgment is coming from a place of guilt and fear. He's trying to leverage it on you. If a person's theology is coming from a fear-based theology, it's because they have embraced fear-based theology as their own, and they're trying to leverage it on you. Not having really examined for themselves whether this be true, whether it aligns with God is love. Because if God is love, and it is, it says God is light, and in him there's no darkness at all. There's absolutely no darkness. Absolutely no darkness at all. Just wanted to check my time. There's absolutely no judgment at all. The judgment and the fear and the guilt and the condemnation that we have experienced is and the suffering, the mental and the psychological suffering that we have, or some of us continue to experience, is only because we're not embracing our full innocence. That's the only answer to it. You can't pay enough tithes and offering. You can't do enough work, do enough service. You can't do enough penance. You can't cry enough. You can't forgive enough. To separate yourself from sin consciousness or from the belief in separation. There's only one answer. Like I said, there's only one problem: separation. There's only one answer: your innocence. That you've never been separated from your Creator. You being that one that God identified as I knew thee before you were formed. And because you are informed, who you are hasn't changed. You just have an experience in form. But now we have to inform our form that is not who we are. You are not a body. You are an eternal being. I love this time of the year. I love this week. This is what they call the Passion Week, leading up to Easter. Just the mention of Easter in and of itself can be useful because, people are usually a little more open. People are a little more open to think about to think about their status in terms of what their relationship with humanity and with the Creator. A little more, just a little more, for a moment, for a week, for a day. So I like this week. That's one reason I'm going to be on here all week. You're going to have to, you may not, you're going to have to turn the dial to get rid of me this week. I'm on all week because I have something to say. I have something to say that is very important, that is full of loveliness, that's full of, God's idea. They call this Resurrection Week. Why do they call it Resurrection Week? Because we have a historical knowledge of, the resurrection of the body of Christ. So even with resurrection, we take that idea and we just point it right back to the body. Oh, the body we focus on, his body was resurrected. That was not his message. His message was what needs to be resurrected is humanity's view of himself. Humanity's concept of himself. That's what true resurrection is. And as we have an appreciation for this time of the year, this week, and as we open ourselves up to greater expansion, greater awareness, to awaken our consciousness, to be open to the answers that we so long for. I'm here to tell you that what true resurrection has to do with is our individual awakening. See, resurrection has to do with going back to the original state. What is the original state? I knew you before you was formed. So Jesus' whole birth, life, death, resurrection, and ascension was his effort, his desire for humanity to know the innocence that they are. And so when he got here, he saw humanity was in this self-imprisoned state of mind. And we thought we were separate from our Creator and each other. He saw it himself. So he chose, wasn't required of him. So he chose to go to the extreme to prove to us of our innocence. Many of us say, well, it was required of him. God killed his innocent son. See how we make of God an unloving father? A natural man wouldn't kill his innocent son? How in the world we think that a perfect God would do that? But that's what happens when our perception gets turned upside down and inside out. But Jesus saw this. And so he went to the extreme to demonstrate that what love is real, to demonstrate that what death is not real. And to demonstrate who we thought we were, it's not real. And that's why he said, all that you've given unto me, I've lost nine. What was he talking about? What was he talking about? He was talking about the assignment you gave to me to demonstrate to humanity that they remain as God created them. As sinless and guiltless and fearless and a part of who he is, what God is. That was the purpose of what? The drama and the trauma and the ultimate, what we call victory. Never intended for us to take and make a religion out of it. Never intended for us to worship it, or worship his body. But we did that because Mr. Paul wanted to take his Jewish background and entangle it into Jesus's message, and that's what you come up with. That's what you come up with. But when you put all of that aside, you put all of the writings aside, all of the books aside, put it all aside. You don't need any of that, and just come with holy hands before your God and ask God, what is the real deal? Without the influence of any books, ask yourself, what is the real deal? Many, 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 many stories out here, but what is the real deal? God would say, I and you and me, we're one. And then when you start there, knowing that you and God are one, so if God is light, you are light. So I must be innocent. And that nothing in this world can separate me from that innocence. Paul picked it up again. Now Paul says some good things. Paul said something that was influenced by his upbringing as a Jew. Meaning there must be a sacrifice. There must be a death. There must be a payment. A payment for what? If you were innocent, then there's no need for a payment. If there's no sin, there's no need for a payment. So we have to create a need for a payment. And that's what we did. I know I'm saying some things here that might, challenge where you've been. I know. Hey, that's okay. It's good. If what we know is not adding to the quality of our life, we need to question it. If what we know is not bringing peace to us, we ought to question it. If what we know is not getting rid of the guilt consciousness, it's not getting rid of the fear or the anxiety, or if it's not getting rid of the guilt, we need to question it. And so where are we in this story I'm telling? Where are we? I'm going to finish reading my thing here. So I became a student of spirituality. And in these recent years, I became a teacher of spirituality. That's why I'm here talking to you right now. And in reality, all of us are teachers in spirituality. Our life is teaching something. Our life is teaching us what we believe. Our life is teaching something. Do we believe in love? Do we believe in oneness? Or do we believe in separation and hatred? Do we believe in inequality? Or do we believe in inequality? Our life is telling us, our life is teaching something. So we're all teachers. So when Scripture said, when Jesus said, many are called, what he's meant to say was all was called. All of us have been called. Be a demonstration of the light of the world. He said, we are the light of the world. That's our function. So are we being the light of the world by following his example of innocence and oneness? Or are we're being darkness by still promoting separation sin consciousness and guilt. What are we doing with our life? Regardless of where you are. I mean, I'm not talking about you making any changes in your life. Whatever you're doing, from the place that you're doing, whatever you're doing, being the light where you are, in the innocence that you are, and what communicating that in the way you're showing up in the world. Whether you're washing dishes, or whether you're on your job, or whether you're in the synagogue, or whether you're at a baseball game, where you're at a party, whether watching a sporting event on television, it doesn't matter. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, are you being the light of the world? Are you promoting separation? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. But we can only live to the level of awareness that we have. So if our awareness is still at the elementary level of getting, the elementary level would be what I need to get saved from hell. That's elementary level. I need to be water baptized. That's elementary level. I need to pray. That's elementary level. I need to forgive. That's elementary level. I need to pay tithes. I need to give. I need all that's elementary level. Jesus said, "Well, you need to do those things." But what's more important is that you need to be the light of the world in doing those things. You're not doing those things to get anything. You're not doing those things to add to your self-made self. You're not doing any of those things to get anything. We can't add one jot or tittle to our innocence, and we can't take anything away from our innocence. We can only act as though that we're guilty and believe as though we're guilty. But it still doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change what God created. It doesn't change that one that God knew before you was formed. So it's like we're here to only return to our formless, timeless, innocent, aware self. It's like that's why we're here. To return to our timeless, formless, innocent self. And so to do that, you have to become a student. Timothy says study to show yourself approved, or study to prove yourself. Because it's through study that we gain understanding and awareness. It is through the study or the inquiry that we understand these more advanced way of being. It's not about teaching, it's about how we show up in the world. And we show up as the light of the world. So I realized that guilt was coming from my conditioning and belief system. And like most people, I was conditioned to believe that separation and body identification was real. Now that makes sense, right? This created a sense of vulnerability and a state of isolation and loneliness. So if you feel isolated, vulnerable, and lonely, you know where it's coming from. It's coming from the self you made. It's not coming from the truth of who you are. When I brought these erroneous thinking patterns, these paradigms to the truth, so I brought the error to the truth. It was an error. It was a sin. It was an error. Because errors can be corrected. In the Course in Miracles, that's why I love the Course in Miracles. The Course in Miracles said, there is no sin. He said we make errors. And errors can be what? Corrected. The sin has with it this negative connotation that until it's dealt with, there's guilt. Sin has this negative connotation that there's a payment required. And that's a man-made idea. That's not a God idea. It's not. It's not a God idea. God doesn't require sacrifice. I know that's huge in certain religions. God does not require sacrifice. As though he's an ego that needs what stroking. God is sure of himself. He doesn't need anything. Yeah, if you have everything, what do you have a need of? God has no need. Reality has no need. And who we are in our true self, we have no need. But we made a world with all these needs, a needy body. All designed to what? To be an attack on the truth, to keep us what? Keep us in the darkness of who we really are. This whole world is designed for that. And if you study the world, that's why we end up that way. But there has to be what? A study that is beyond what the world has taught us. Even creation itself, if you studied it, will eventually what? Convince you of your true self, that you're one with it, that you're not separate and part of it, that oneness is all there is. And Jesus, what? He brought the message of oneness. Everything in his message was about the oneness. And they said, no, we're not one. You blaspheming. Who have made you God? How can you be so confident about who you are? How can you be so confident about your Father? Calling God your Father. When I brought this error thinking, this erroneous thinking to the truth of my innocence, I realized I was making up the suffering that I was experiencing. I was making it all up. This awareness of innocence changed everything about me. When I embraced my innocence, which I call the atonement, I accept the atonement for myself. The atonement is really the reality that nothing has changed. Everything is like it always has been. Humpty Dumpty has not fallen off the wall and broken into billions and billions of pieces. God's love is what? Intact. Who I was before I was formed in my mother's womb has not changed. See, that's the atonement. I am accepting the at one meant with the original. The original is still in place. It doesn't need fixing. It's never been broken. What needs to be fixed and broke is the way we think. It's fixing and the breakage happen in our minds, as though we fell asleep into this trance or into this dream of separation. That's why the term awakening is used. Why? Because we would have to be dreaming of a world of separation, of a God of separation, of a human race that's separate and not one. We would have to be dreaming. Because in reality, it's not the truth. Heaven remains as it always was, as it was in the beginning, now, and forever it shall be, world without end. That's what means so much to me now. And I didn't understand it when I was a little boy singing it in the Presbyterian church. Now I understand. Nothing has changed. We remain in the heart of God where we always been. We are the holy home of God. We are the innocent children of God. Innocent. Without any activity or any event taking place in the world, we're still innocent. If you didn't incarnate as a person, we'll still be innocent. If Jesus didn't incarnate as a person, well, we would still be innocent. Us appearing in form doesn't make us innocent. Us appearing in form doesn't make us innocent. What makes us innocent is that what we remain as God created us. And in creation, there is no two of a kind. There's only one of a kind. And what he is what he created, what he's extended. And he calls it the I am. That's why you always saying, I am this, I am that, I am, I am, I am, I am. But are we saying I am innocent? Or are we saying I am guilty? So it lets you know, it helps you to locate where you are. God located Adam that way when he walked into the garden in the cool of the day. He said, Adam, where are you? In other words, Adam, are you still thinking along the lines of reality? Or are you what? Are you entertaining other what alien ideas? And what did Adam say? He said, I was afraid. So I hid myself. See? So God knew where he was. He didn't entertain the tiny man idea of separation. And from that, the whole world was formed. And all the drama from a tiny man idea that's not even real. The only thing that's real is your innocence. And I'm here on this Passion Week, on this Easter time season, to remind humanity of that. You are innocent. And in your innocence is your salvation. And your salvation is guaranteed. It's guaranteed. It's a promise from God that all humanity will eventually wake up to the reality of who they are. Guaranteed. See, if we taught this to people when we were, young, then we wouldn't have so much of the tragic expressions and experiences that we see in the world. But I'm gonna finish this because I know I've been lengthy, and I intended to be. I can't think of anything better to do from my point of view. I hope this helping my viewers. It was out of my own experience of freedom from guilt and fear that I dedicated my life to helping others come to know the innocence that they are. That's what I'm doing. I'm only here to be helpful. I'm not here to be religious. This is straight up talk. This is the real deal, as I know it. This is the real deal as I have experienced it. So my life is dedicated to helping others know the innocence that they are. You are innocent. And with this innocence comes an inner sense of oneness, of equality, an inner sense of peace and happiness and joy and laughter and expansion and expression, an inner sense of light and immortality, an inner sense of purpose, an inner sense of extension, a desire to extend this innocence in everything, that it will impact your perception, your sensation, your feelings, your emotions. It will impact your decisions. It will impact your creativity. It will impact your health, your well-being, your self-image. It will impact your complete experience as a human being. A human being in your original state. What a human being is. Having a body, time, space experience from your place of From your place of innocence. That's what a real human being looks like. always at peace, always seeing what is real, seeing what is what, like Paul said, whatsoever thing is lovely, whatsoever thing is just, whatsoever thing is what praiseworthy, whatsoever thing is what of a good report, whatsoever thing has virtue. He says, what think on these things. That's what a real human being. That's how a real human being thinks. That's how a real human being um, is transformed from being conformed to this world. But he's transformed by the renewing of what his mind. Because everything, all your experiences is taking place in your mind. And whatever's in your mind, you project it out. And the world shows it back to you. So if you have a scarcity mentality, you project that out, and the world projects back to you scarcity. If you have a mentality of limitation, you project that out, and what the world shows you back limitation. But if you have a mind like the mind of Christ, like it says in Philippians 2:5, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ. So the implication here is what? There is a mind that we are to have in this life, in this body, mind, time, space, form, experience. There's a mind that we are to have to go along with this. If we're going to be the light of the world. So he said, let this mind be in you. And so we can't be double-minded. We have to be single-minded. And so the mind that God is talking about here is this mind that was in Christ. He said, let it be in us. So we have the mind of Christ. And then it goes on to say in that same scripture, he said, being in the form of man, which we all are. We're all in the form of man, a human. He said, so being in the form of man, because Jesus was in the form of man. He had a body just like you and I. He slept, he ate, he had to flush his body just like you and I. You see, so being in the form of man. So while now you and I in this incarnation here in 2022, we are in the form of God. He said, being in the form of God. So even though we're appearing to be in these bodies, we're still in the form of God. So it says, Philippians 2:5, it says, being in the form of God, Jesus thought it not robbery to be equal with God. In other words, he didn't think he was taking anything away from God's superiority or God's divinity, by calling himself, by saying he has equality with God. Meaning him and God was one. That he and God share the same being. But we can say the same. You and me can say the same. It's an expression of our declaration of our innocence. That being in the form of Oliver, I don't think I'm taking anything away from God by saying that I have equality with him, because I do. That's what innocence is. That's what innocence is. It's equality. And that's why you see such a big fight out in the world over inequality. Why? Because at our core nature, we know that inequality is an abomination. We know it's not right. That's why we rise up against it. That's your true nature, rising up. Because you are innocent. You have equality. You have not equality that the systems of this world can give you, but you have equality with the creator of all things. So you're not going to let a system that trying to conform you to its inequality, its separation, to imprison you for very long. thus the outrage, or the uproar. Care who you are, what race you are, it doesn't matter. It's just in the human nature. Or it's in your divine nature. So Paul said in Philippians 2:5, that we have equality with God. And we're not taking anything away from his divinity by saying that. Because you do. That's what innocence does. That's how innocence talk. That's how innocent feel. So we have equality with God. Why? Because we share the same being that God is. We would have to. We are what God is. God is what we are. There's no separation. There is no separation. We remain as we were created. So it's out of my own experience of freedom from guilt and fear that I have dedicated my life to helping others come to know the innocence that they are. With a sense of innocence come an awareness of equality. See? With man and with God. I have learned that where there is no equality, there is no relationship. Where there's no equality, there's no relationship. Wow. I'm just going to finish reading this because my time is up. And you can find this posted on my Facebook page. Therefore, true love cannot be experienced in the absence of innocence and equality. So if we're not experiencing love of ourselves, of others, or love of God, because there's not a sense of innocence or equality. We have to embrace it. It's there. You have to inquire into it. I have realized that this is the glory that all humanity sees. I also realize that it is the real message and purpose Jesus came to share with a world that desperately needed enlightenment. So as you approach this Easter time, with all the uncertainties that loom large in the world, and there's many of them, I ask you to consider the unchangeable innocence that you are, and the answer to all your anxiety, dis-ease, pain, and lack of peace. You are innocent, complete, and whole because you were created by love, and you remain as love created you. This is the glory God gave to all humanity. It can only be found within the acceptance of your true self, because this is where God placed it. To look for it outside of you is to question the reality that you are. To embrace this reality of your sinlessness is what true resurrection means. Jesus proved our innocence in his resurrection. Now it's time for us to prove our innocence by walking in the glory of our resurrection. Let not this Easter time pass you by and you remain in guilt and fear. You are guiltless, and in your innocence is your salvation. Wow. Just think about that. God, it's my prayer that we embrace what is right there in front of our face, for it is the answer to all humanity's problems, the knowing of yourself. Don't let it pass you by this Easter time. I love you so much. You can't do nothing about it. You are so innocent. You are so equal. You are so God. God bless you. Bye-bye.